your first 2 TPAs performed, root collar excavation and aeration decompaction, allows you to determine root depth, which is very important for evaluating minimum topsoil requirements. Now, I'm using topsoil and organic matter almost interchangeably, and I want you to understand that the organic matter, when it begins to compost and rot down with the processes of humification and fermentation, that topsoil results from the trees taking over this area, inhabiting it with the roots, creating the pore space, and it becomes alive when that takes place. The most current research on this subject has determined, without doubt, that the long-term benefits of air tillage, which is what we're talking about here with the incorporation of organic matter, were only achieved when organic matter incorporation and surface mulching were also performed. In other words, the two of them need to proceed hand in hand, and you're going to see examples of what we mean when you go into a designed ecosystem of one of your customers and they have critical root zones that are already covered with existing organic matter. And determining where the roots are is an extremely important part of deciding what action is necessary, whether you need to incorporate or whether you need to acquire additional materials and add it on. And so when I talk about pore space and density of soil, what I'm going to use this as a example right here. This is a 1 gallon jar, and it is filled with all kinds of different shapes and sizes, and this is what we're referring to as the clumps and the clods in topsoil. And this is the desirable structure of a soil that you are striving for. You can see that there's all kinds of small spaces here where the water goes into this, and there's larger spaces where air is contained in the soil. These are essential elements for soil health, and they must be promoted with the establishing of the topsoil skirt. And when you do that, and when your soil looks and feels nice and loose, just like this would if we were to press down on it, you have what we refer to as a healthy environment for root growth. And so the effects of fill dirt on this pore space will be discussed, because that's one of the problems that you're going to be faced with as you begin to examine the critical root zones and the microclimates within a designed ecosystem of your customers. Noteworthy in this representation here is the depth of these secondary scaffold roots. See the nice thickness of them, not quite as big around as my little finger, but they are a good 6 to 8 inches down, and even under the most extreme droughty conditions, chances are these roots will not dry out. They will maintain their function and continue to acquire sources of nutrients and energy. And as you can see, they come all the way up to the surface where we've got the beginnings of humification. See where this soil begins to ball up right here? That is the beginning of the formation of humus, which is there's an earthworm, and we know that we've got good soil chemistry when we see that, and we've got these nice aggregates that are stuck together with their own soil glue that allows them to exchange substances, nutrients that we apply in the soil, transformed and moved into the tree through those little fine, fibrous root hairs that you see virtually everywhere when we begin to take this apart. As you can see, they are literally on every strand.
and that is cheap to keep.
Establishing topsoil skirts is so important because it counters the effects of fill dirt. And in most of your intentionally managed urban, residential, and commercial environments, you're going to find a lot of critical root zones covered with fill dirt. And there's been all kinds of research as to why this fill dirt has such a dramatic negative impact on most tree, bush, and turf species. And it basically comes down to reduced airfield pore space. It comes down to reduced water availability, and it's possible that the water deficit in the root zone resulting from restricted water percolation into the base soil is an important factor in fill-induced tree energy. Placing fill over the trees is ill-advised because the gas exchange is disrupted and because many trees are subject to collar rot. You've seen trees that have fallen over in major storms. If the root ball is not turned up with them and they're just rotted off right there at the collar, that's collar rot, and it comes from this fill dirt being placed over the root collar, which we have talked about repeatedly as being a key plant structure that must be exposed to air and light. To give you a real good example, we did, Bartlett Tree did an extensive amount of survey and inventory work on storm damaged trees from Hurricane Fran, and that 33% of the failures discovered in that storm were covered and smothered root collars. And only 8% of the failures had exposed root collars. And so that sort of points us in a direction. And so you've got three factors that determine the injury severity of fill dirt. And this is what you must remember. You've got plant factors. What kind of a plant, tree, large bush, or community or a grouping of trees is covered with a fill dirt? Number two, fill soil factors. What is covering that, and what is the thickness and density of that soil? And then thirdly, the base soil factor. So you got plant factors, fill factors, and base soil. What kind of dirt, what kind of soil was the tree originally planted in, and determining what is to be done to correct that will guide your actions in the critical root zone, whether you're going to acquire new material, whether you're going to incorporate by aeration, and you're going to form new topsoil in order to stimulate, animate, and accelerate root growth in the critical root zones of these trees.
This is a crepe myrtle. This is its fourth or fifth year post-planting. We've got a little bit of deferred maintenance at the bottom that I'm going to show you, where we rake off mulch that has been, we believe, improperly placed on top of the critical root zone, because the owner of this property passed away in 2008, and since 2008 there has been a lot of uncertainty as to who manages what and who spends the money. So we're coming back here, and I'm going to show you that 4 years after we were last here to maintain this, exactly what has resulted. And we're going to pull the mulch back, pull a plug, and show you what exists underneath. This is the crepe myrtle root ball. We've got a fair amount of root development here. You can see some of the major roots that we cut in pulling this plug for a sample. We have some fibrous root growth, but it needs to be a little bit, in my opinion, thicker in order to support the additional growth that I know the owner wants from this planting. And here's a good aggregate. We've got earthworm, we've got weed roots, we've got mycorrhiza, we've got secondary roots here, and we've got most of what we want. We just want more of it, and we want to stimulate its growth out away from the plant itself.